England. However, the English Reformation was the work of Parliament and not of the king alone. There was a growing national feeling in England against the Church of Rome and the power of the Pope owing to clerical abuses. There was a general belief that the church was being ruined by its wealth and worldliness. There was a strong opposition to papal aggression. Men felt that drastic measures alone could purify the church. The spirit of inquiry due to the Renaissance was fatal to the old position of the Roman Catholic Church, and the special abuses of the time in England included the abuse of trials for heresy, the abuse of mortuary fees, the abuse of clerical tithes and fees, pluralities, and non residence. In 1531, the breach with Rome began. The clergy were forced to recognize Henry as supreme head of the church in England. This was the action of Henry himself, not of Parliament, but later proceedings were commenced by the Commons. The Parliament passed a series of acts which gradually and certainly led to the break with Rome. The nation generally accepted these changes. A. Dissolution of the monasteries. One of the most important acts passed by the Parliament towards Reformation was the dissolution of monasteries. Causes. The excuses for the dissolution of monasteries were that the monasteries had outlived their usefulness, that many of them, especially the smaller ones, were badly conducted, the monks living slack and sometimes disreputable lives, that they were conspiring with the Pope against the king's supremacy, and the many monasteries were no longer the homes of learning, the primary function for which they were originally founded. However, the real reasons for the dissolution were that the king coveted their vast wealth, that the nobles and merchants, the two classes of which Parliament chiefly consisted, wanted a chance to buy estates cheaply, that after stripping the church of its power, it was necessary and natural to strip it of its wealth, and that the monasteries were a non national element in the country, for their first allegiance was to Rome, and so they were potential pockets of resistance to the new ideas. Progress of the dissolution. Thomas Cromwell, in his capacity of Vicar General of Henry VIII, organized an investigation into the state of affairs in 1535. The visitors were doctors of civil law and priests, and their findings were recorded in the Black Book. The result of the visitation was that in 1536, about 376 lesser monasteries were within an income of less than £200 per annum were dissolved. In 1539, about 645 greater houses were dissolved. All the wealth and estates of the religious orders, amounting to 1/8 of the cultivated land in England, passed to the king. The remainder of the wealth was not used for any charitable or profitable purpose. It was used to relieve the royal financial strain and to make an influential section of the nation compliant to the royal will. The confiscation of religious endowments was completed by 1547 by the Chartist Act, which took away from the guilds and other corporate bodies that part of their funds which was associated with religious observances. Results. The most immediate results of the dissolution of the monasteries were twofold. 1. Such great quantities of land were sold that it went very cheaply. Many middle classmen were able to buy large estates and set themselves up as landed gentry. The Pilgrimage of Grace. The act which authorized the dissolution said that the proceeds were to be used for religious, educational, and charitable purpose. But little was spent thus, though a few bishoprics, schools, and almshouses were founded. However, there were a number of indirect results. The new landlords were more up to date in farming methods than the old monks had been. Hence, more lands were enclosed for sheep farming, and more village folk were thrown out of employment, and this swelled the ranks of the sturdy beggars, which the monks themselves had no need to do owing to their pensions. Until the Poor Law was passed in Elizabeth's reign, nobody took up the work of the monasteries in relieving the poor. The disappearances of the abbots from the House of Lords weakened the influence of the church in Parliament. The confiscation told heavily against the working of the guilds and the help they had formerly rendered to the poorer classes, both in education and in charity generally. But by far the most important result was the strengthening of the landed gentry class. Well-to-do merchants and lawyers were now able to buy estates, thus gaining the social dignity and political importance which only landowners possessed. This class was already becoming the most important in the country, but the dissolution gave it great stimulus. Incidentally, it was this class which was mainly responsible for overthrowing the power of the crown in the following centuries. The Pilgrimage of Grace. One immediate result of the suppression of the monasteries was a great rising in Lincolnshire and Yorkshire. The northern countries were wilder and less populated than the southern. The people there still looked up to their local landlords as leaders. And these old fashioned nobles and gentry disliked the centralized government, which was set up by the Tudors. They particularly resented the authority of a low born minister like Cromwell, and worst of all, they were aggrieved by the dissolution. For the monasteries still served very useful purposes in those backward parts of the country, and when 50 of them were abolished in Lincolnshire along during the summer of 1536, anger rose to its zenith. The insolent behavior of Cromwell's agents led to revolt there, and no sooner had this been suppressed than an even more alarming outbreak occurred in Yorkshire. Under the leadership of Robert Aske, a London lawyer who owned an estate in that country, the malcontents adopted a banner on which were depicted the 5 wounds of Christ and called their movement the Pilgrimage of Grace. They declared their devoted loyalty to the king, but petitioned him to dismiss Cromwell from his service and to restore the monasteries. Henry had no regular army, and while a force was being got together, he invited Aske up to London to talk matters over. Aske urged his followers to remain quiet, relying on the king's work of honor. But the moment Henry was in a position to act, he threw off the mask, dispersed the rebels by force, and ordered such dreadful execution to be done upon a good number of inhabitants in every town, village, and hamlet, as they may be a fearful spectacle to others hereafter that would practice in like manner. Among the victims was Aske, to whose loyalty and moderation be owed so much. One important result of the pilgrimage was that Council of North was set up at York to bring the royal authority into more direct contact with the people of northern shires.